Good morning to all of you. Thank you so much for joining this webinar. నిన్నటి దినాన జరిగిన వెబినార్ లో టైమ్ టు ట్రాన్స్ఫార్మ్ ద ఫుడ్ సిస్టమ్ మిస్టర్ రవీంద్ర గారి టాక్ లో ఎంతో చక్కగా అందరూ పార్టిసిపేట్ చేశారు. యాక్టివ్ గా ఇన్వాల్వ్ అయి మీనింగ్ఫుల్ క్వశ్చన్స్ ని అడిగి క్లారిఫై చేసుకున్నారు. ఈ రోజు కూడా దాదాపుగా 200 పైచిలకు పీపుల్ మనకు ఈ మీటింగ్ లో జాయిన్ అయ్యారు. ఈ మీటింగ్ లో అలైన్ డిపార్ట్మెంట్స్, స్టేక్ హోల్డర్స్, NGOs, టీచర్స్, మీడియా ప్రతినిధులు, అంతేకాకుండా ప్రొఫెసర్స్, స్కాలర్స్, టిఎస్ బయోడైవర్సిటీ బోర్డ్ ఎక్స్పర్ట్ కమిటీ మెంబర్స్ కూడా జాయిన్ అయ్యారు. అంతేకాకుండా మన మధ్యలో టుడే సెషన్ ని తీసుకోవడానికి సైన్స్ అండ్ ట్రెడిషన్ గురించి మనతో మాట్లాడడానికి డాక్టర్ కన్నా కె సిరిపురపు గారు మనతో ఉన్నారు. డాక్టర్ కన్నా గారు వ్యవసాయ జీవ వైవిధ్యం, జీవ సాంస్కృతిక వైవిధ్యం, సాంప్రదాయ మరియు సమాజ ఆధారిత విధానాలపై, సహజ వనరుల పాలనపై ఆసక్తిగా పనిచేస్తున్నటువంటి పరిశోధకులు. వీరు MSc మరియు MPhil ఇన్ ఎన్విరాన్మెంటల్ సైన్సెస్ ఆంధ్ర యూనివర్సిటీలో కంప్లీట్ చేశారు. MSc జాగ్రఫికల్ సైన్సెస్ ని యూనివర్సిటీ ఆఫ్ మేరీల్యాండ్ ఎట్ కాలేజ్ పార్క్ USA లో పూర్తి చేశారు. ప్రస్తుతం వీరు హైదరాబాద్ కు చెందినటువంటి వాసన్ NGO లో పనిచేస్తా ఉన్నారు. భారతదేశంలోని వ్యవసాయ జీవ వైవిధ్యం, జీవ సాంస్కృతిక వైవిధ్యం, జీవనోపాధి మరియు వాటి విధానాల ఇంటర్ఫేజ్లను అధ్యయనం చేసి ఒక డాక్యుమెంట్ కూడా తయారు చేయడం జరిగింది. సో డాక్టర్ కన్నా కె సిరిపురపు గారు మన మధ్య ఉండడం మనకు ఎంతగానో గర్వకారణం. ఐఎమ్ హ్యాండ్ ఓవరింగ్ దిస్ టైమ్ టు డాక్టర్ కన్నా గారు. థ్యాంక్ యూ సార్. ప్లీజ్ లీడ్ దిస్ సెషన్. ఓవర్ టు డాక్టర్ కన్నా గారు.
Yeah, thank you very much, Lekhan, for that wonderful introduction, and hope I'm audible.
Yes, sir, you are audible.
Okay, yeah. Good morning, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome, a warm welcome to all of you. And I wish you the International Day for Biological Diversity. That's the reason why we are all here to celebrate. And it's a privilege and it's a pleasure to have to present my views and share my experiences with all the scholars who are here, who are present here. Very welcome and very good morning to all the dignitaries, scholars, students, people from the line department, all the government officials, NGOs, friends and colleagues. Right now, I would like to discuss my observations and viewpoints, but my presentation and discussions are as hypothetical and as intuitive as the subject that I'm going to talk about. Today, I'm here among you to present my views on modern science as well as traditional knowledge, and the difference in between these two things, between modern science and our understanding of traditional knowledge, the way it is. And before I go, as you could see on the screen, you see this wonderful and beautiful motif here on the screen, which is a representation of life and culture of Udyapam communities in Odisha. A very vibrant community. Sorry if I'm not audible. It's a very vibrant community found in Odisha. Yeah, hope I'm audible. Sorry for the disturbance. So I'll just proceed further and present my views on this. And before I go and talk something about the topic, which is science, modern science and traditions, I would like to give a short brief of the organization that I'm associated with, which is WASSAN, which is based out of Hyderabad. And the kind of opportunities this organization is provided in terms of working for Agro-Biodiversity. Basically, I work as a researcher in Agro-Biodiversity here, and you could see a picture over here, which is of Sripurapu cattle, which was 44 cattle breed that was registered in India with the NBBHR. And we are fortunate to work with Telangana State Biodiversity Board, and Dr. Shilpi Sharma has been very supportive, and she played a pivotal role in the registration, characterization and registration of this breed. Apart from this Sripurapu cattle, WASSAN is also working on characterization and registration of and descript breeds, humor like cattle breeds, which is Vandharavi and Nalamara cattle, which are from Telangana, Andhra Pradesh. And besides, like they're also working on characterization and registration of Malkanagiri poultry in Odisha. And apart from that, we have also the WASSAN as an organization has also characterized like 2 accessions for different indigenous croplands, including millets, oilseeds, and pulses, and few paddy varieties as well. And apart from that, WASSAN is also playing a critical role in promotion of desi-based, chicken breed-based. Oh, I could not remove this. Yeah. Yeah, sorry for the disturbance. Yeah, apart from that, WASSAN is also working on conservation of indigenous fish species, diversity, and development of aquatic habitats in AP and Odisha. And apart from that, the organization is also working on documentation and promotion of traditional crop practices and seed systems across like in India. Apart from that, the organization has also played a pivotal role in collaboration with the Odisha state government and so as FAO in establishment of Agro-Biodiversity Research Center in Malkanagiri district of Odisha. And apart from that, it has also played a pivotal role in constitution of a team at the district level in Malkanagiri district of Odisha to document and do research on agro-biodiversity and biocultural diversity of tribal people in the state. That's the brief about our association with agro-biodiversity and biodiversity in general. Coming to the topic today, which is about modern science and traditional knowledge. I would like to present my views in terms of the philosophy and practice of modern science and traditional knowledge, and how the policy and practice of modern science and traditional knowledge is influencing the policy and the kind of problems like that are associated with it, and the emerging possibilities like of this, and the need for pluralism of modern science and traditional knowledge in the context of biodiversity and biodiversity conservation. So before I move further, I would like to discuss more about the philosophy of Western or modern science and technology and traditional knowledge and traditional technical knowledge. So if I juxtapose like these two, the modern science versus like traditional knowledge, the difference basically is the way it is approached. The one of the major differences, like these are also the definitions, like you can say, and there is no specific definition. There is no specific definition like as such, like but one thing you can see here, like that the modern science is basically theoretical knowledge. And the theory like is based upon when a hypothesis goes from hypothesis to a law, and law becomes a theory, and which is like widely accepted. And it's like through the deductive and deductive reasonings, like and where you go and do and repetitive experiments, and then you develop a theory based on that. On the other hand, the traditional knowledge, which is exclusively based upon the experience, the personal experience, and basically it is more of community level or a group level experience, which is a collective knowledge and a collective experience. And on the other hand, the modern science, it favors analytical and reductionist methods. Reductionist is like simplifications of complex things. Nature is simplified, forest is simplified, everything like it is around us like simplified like through analytical processes. But on the other hand, like, and it's also, it's based on proof, like, and unless like there is a proof, like you don't necessarily, or the modern science like it doesn't necessarily prove. Whereas the traditional knowledge is more of intuitive. It doesn't like, it's, for example, God. On the other hand, as you can see here, the traditional knowledge is more intuitive. Intuitive in the sense, like, and you talk about God and spirits, but it's like there is no proof for that. but we believe them like intuitively. It's more like that, and it's like very holistic in its view. And in the modern day science philosophy, it's deeply rooted in the philosophy of ancient Greece and Renaissance. And Greece and Renaissance, in Greece, and the philosophy of modern science and the approach and the school of modern science is basically informed by the ancient Greece philosophy. On the other hand, the traditional knowledge is more of the Eastern sciences, and it has developed in a very different and radically different manner. And the way it is transmitted is like totally different like from the modern sciences. And whereas like the modern sciences are like more of the positivist and materialist, like in the sense, it's like more of logical and it's more of mathematical proof. Like you design some models or you design some experiments, like you do some experiments and you have like quantitative proof for that or mathematical like equations for that. But on the other hand, the traditional knowledge is more of spiritual and doesn't make distinctions between empirical and sacredness. And coming to the modern science, it's more of objective and quantitative, as I already said. Like, right? Objective in the sense like you take a neutral position, you don't take sides of it. And it's like more of a quantitative, it's like more mathematical. And on the other hand, the traditional knowledge is more subjective and qualitative. And most of this knowledge is coded. Coded in the sense, it doesn't necessarily tell you directly what it means, but it's like coded in terms of rituals, superstitions. It's a wrong word, but yeah, beliefs, like, and I would say. But you need to decode that to understand like what actually that means. And the way like this transmission happens with the modern science is basically through academic and literate like and transmission. You should go to a school or a university or a formal education to actually get that information transmitted or like imbibe that information. On the other hand, the traditional knowledge is passed down like to generations, like through oral like traditions, like people like tell to their next generation or kids like orally. It doesn't necessarily like you need not go to school. For example, you use turmeric in everyday life, but your grandma uses it, your mother uses it, and you use it. But nobody actually tell you, like, and told you that curcumin, like turmeric has curcumin, as wide spectrum antibacterial, antifungal properties. But it's just like passed on like to generations. And one of the major differences, like, and I would say here, like, put here between the modern science and traditional knowledge is the modern science isolates itself like from the object of its inquiry. For example, like as a researcher, like I don't necessarily put myself among in the forest, like or like I just go and like spend my entire life like living in the forest. But I just like see myself like distinct from that. I just pull myself away from that. And most of my experiments are controlled. It's not like left for something else like it to take care of. I have control on that. And in a way, the scientist like totally isolates and separates like themselves from the object of their studies. However, on the other hand, the traditional knowledge depends on context and particular local conditions. And people are immersed in that. They live in that. They live through the expectations. I mean, those experiences, lived experiences like that translates into knowledge. And then that is transformed, like and transmitted like, to the next generation. Is the major difference. Like, as I said, like there is no one definition like to put things together, but there are multiple definitions. But this is a philosophy of the modern science as well as traditional. And let's see like and how this philosophy is influencing the practice and our world viewpoints and how we see the world like as people who are seasoned like, through modern science or like you are as a part of the community you are in, like and how your traditional values and knowledge influences like the viewpoints and the way you see the world. Before I go, I would like to give a small introduction of the indigenous people and culture here, like because when we speak about tradition, like we can't just segregate that like, from indigenous people, but traditional knowledge doesn't necessarily confine to just indigenous people, but anything like that we don't acquire through formal education by going to school, but you acquire it like through the teachings of your elders or your cultural religious beliefs or whatever, or the community you are a part of, makes like the traditional knowledge, which doesn't necessarily taught in the academic setting, but you actually acquire it like through experience. Is traditional. It's not confined to just indigenous people, but any community like that you're a part of is a traditional knowledge and the knowledge system that is in. And here, as you can see, like in the vibrant hues of indigenous people, their culture, traditions, and you can see like there are more than 300 different ethnic tribes or like tribes around the world. Even in India, I mean, around like 300 million people are there in the world, like who belongs like into these ethnic or tribal communities, which makes like less than 5% of the total like world population. But these indigenous communities like can have a very strong affinity like towards nature, and which is like same across the world. Even in India, like we have around 140 million tribal communities or tribal population in India, and even they make around 5% of population of India, which are like as vibrant, as diverse. Their traditional knowledge systems are diverse, and their institutions are diverse, and belief systems are diverse. And coming to the practice and like a viewpoint, and how the philosophy of modern science versus traditional knowledge actually influences like our understanding, our approach towards the nature or like in the surroundings or everything that we see. Here I'm going to give you examples of like how we see as a person from the mainstream society who is trained academically, how I see the planet, the earth, the nature, and how I see the forest, how I see animals, how I see my food, how I see livestock is the kind of examples like that I'm going to present over here. Like the viewpoints, like how a person who comes from science background, modern science background, and a person like who is from traditional knowledge background views it. For example, like the indigenous people or like a traditional knowledge, like sees or considers like nature or earth as a mother, and they see this intricate interconnectedness and interdependence, and they have a kind of reverence. They feel like a kind of like sacredness, holiness towards it. They consider it's very complex. But on the other hand, the modern science viewpoint is earth as a rock, or like something about the geochemical reactions and the physics of it. And more so, it actually sees like an earth or nature as a kind of property or resources like that has to be exploited or that has to be used for the benefit of human beings. Is how they approach. Like the element of sacredness is totally absent and missing like in the modern science that we follow these days. And coming to the viewpoint of a forest, like you see, if I keep asking this question, like whenever I speak to people, and what comes to your mind when you ask the word, when you say the word forest or a jungle, and most often than not, or people usually give me answers like trees, animals, wildlife, biodiversity, climate change. But hardly I ever heard of people talking about culture, or people talking about people or tribes, or if you are a practicing Hindu, like you might also say Mahabharata or Ramayana, which unfolds like within the forest. And that sacredness, like that human face of a forest, or the human civilization or human evolution from the forest is totally missing from the definition of a modern science of a forest, which considered more forest as a commodity. And it just like says like it's an area of like which is predominantly dominated by trees or vegetation, but not necessarily in terms of spirituality. But on the other hand, the traditional knowledge like sees a forest as the highest form of spiritual evolution. And believe it or not, like in ancient India, have scriptures like dating back to 8,000 to 1,000 like before Christ BC, and have the mention of different kinds of forests, like say Mahavan, Shivan, and Tapovan. Like I'll get back to them later in the presentation. And in the ancient scriptures of India, like there is this particular very interesting line which says, "A village without a forest is incomplete." Which means like the village should have a forest. So the village is complete like when you have this forest. But on the other hand, now with the new approach and paradigm of forest conservation, of biodiversity conservation, you remove villages out of forest. Our village should not be inside the forest, or forest should not be next to a village. You totally remove that human habitation like from the forest. But on the other hand, in the traditional system, a village without a forest is incomplete. That's a kind of like a viewpoint, and that's a kind of like difference in between these two schools of philosophy and the practice and viewpoints. And as I said, like in how modern science views certain species, like in which I'm using the word and definition keystone species, like which we already know like about this. And keystone species are very crucial like for the health of an ecosystem. They are the indicator species, like, and they gives you a kind of indication of the health of the ecosystem. If they are keystone species in that particular, either they control the system in such a way, they hold the system together, or they indicate the health of the ecosystem. For example, an elephant or a tiger, whatever. But that's a definition like of modern science is just an organism like, that holds the system together. But on the other hand, if you see from the traditional point of view, it's more of sacred. It's very holy, it's spiritual, it's culturally important, but it's all coded. As you say, like banyan tree or the fig tree itself is considered as an ecosystem of its own, but banyan tree is so sacred like for certain religions and like a certain communities, because like banyan tree is so sacred, like you do not, the religiously like it's forbidden like to harm that particular fig tree, because the Indian banyan tree, because you harm it, you're going to destroy an ecosystem. But that particular importance of that keystone species is coded in religious texts and rituals and beliefs, which you have to decode like to understand the significance of it. Like, but the modern science usually brushes them off as superstitions without really understanding or decoding of what's actually in there. And as you can see, like I'm giving some examples, like not from India, but also like from the Polynesian people from Polynesia, or Canada, or the US, where they have like these totemic plants or like a totemic poles. Like, as you can see, like it's totemic pole over here, which represents like a different keystone species, let it be bear or seal or whale or frog or whatever. And every totem like has like a certain specific belief, like for example, wolf has a certain way of understanding of the by the traditional, by the indigenous communities over there. And for example, whale or octopus or frog or bear like, has a certain human face and human value like, that is associated with that, and they revert for that in that way. And coming to how we see food and medicine, for example, in certain communities like millets, like we see now, like millet has become like a new superfood, and it's a miracle grain. But for some certain communities, like in most parts, like, it's considered like a secret. And for example, like as I said, turmeric. The modern science, like you say, yeah, it's a broad spectrum antifungal, antibacterial, anticarcinogenic, antidepressant. So you take it as a medicine, but like the moment you take it as a pill, you isolate like the curcumin, you isolate the compounds from curcumin, and you administer them as a pill. But there is the sacredness or the rituals like that are associated with administering a turmeric is totally lost in the modern science. It's kind of reductionist. But on the other hand, you see the picture like here, it's from Admapur, like where there is this particular saint called Valuma, who is a saint like of the Guru Bhakti, which is a pastoralist community. And every year, like there is this procession, like where turmeric is usually used, like sprinkled like all over like, during the procession. Not only just that, when turmeric is widely used in rituals, like whatever it is, like anything like that is good, it starts, especially in certain communities and certain religions, like it starts with turmeric. And it's either it's wedding or whatever, like you administer that. But there is a sense of sacredness, there is sense of holiness, there is sense of reverence like to that. You don't necessarily isolate the compounds like them, such as curcumin out of it, but you use that, you keep it intact. but you use it like with a sense of reverence towards it. For example, even Tulsi or the holy basil is another example. Like in every practicing Hindu or like in most of these communities, like they have this particular plant, Osima sanctum, yeah. And but you don't necessarily have it, take it as a pill, but you actually keep it as a holy, as a sacred plant, which you do like in certain rituals. And every time like you do perform some rituals, like you have this sacredness. So the traditional knowledge doesn't take the element like that is crucial like for the well-being out of that particular plant or out of that particular tuber, but it has evolved like in a certain rituals around it, like in the sense of sacredness, like which the modern science doesn't do. And coming to grass and how like in the modern science like use it, like grass as a fodder and nothing more than that. But how about like in the using grass or considering grass as sacred? Like these pictures are from the Gaulo community, which is traditional semi-nomadic community of Maharashtra. And they observe this particular festival called Baldev Festival, which is a 5-day festival, which is observed like during the monsoon when the grass like shoots sprout, and they consider like these grass shoots as a manifestation of Lord Krishna, a reincarnation or incarnation of Lord Krishna. And Baldev, like all the communities involved, like right from men, women, elders, and children, and they participate in this procession. Like they take this grass like in all the commons or the grasslands. They bring it home. They perform like rituals, and after which like they go and they flow it like in the nearby rivers or water. But in that ritual, the entire community is involved, and it has like a larger meaning. It's not just like just a kind of ritual, but it has like a larger connotation of securing like fodder for the cattle and securing like that particular grassland or sustainable development and management of that grassland. They don't take the fodder out of it. They don't necessarily see fodder as a grass or food for cattle, but there is a sense of sacredness. There is a sense of responsibility in that. That is how like the modern science, the difference between the modern science and the traditional knowledge here. And also, this is like some really beautiful and vibrant example pictures like from Belpur, which is a festival like that is celebrated like throughout central India, where after the agriculture session or season, usually the oxen are thanked, and there is a certain rituals are performed, and like some pujas and like the oxen are worshipped like, as a means of gratitude for their contribution to the agriculture. And you see like these oxen are decorated, and there is a ritual, and the entire community and the farming community especially is involved in that. And at that point of time, oxen are kind of considered sacred. Even small kids like are involved in that. And that particular sacredness like instilled among these kids like right from the childhood, like which doesn't happen in the modern science. Like in modern science, you see oxen as the definition like an oxen as is draft power. It's animal energy, but the sacredness is totally missing. It's just a source of energy, that's all. So that's the kind of end of how the philosophy, the examples like I'm concluding the examples like how the philosophy of modern science and traditional knowledge influences like our practice and viewpoints of the world. Now I would like to move on and talk about the policy and practice. So in terms of policy, like how this modern science is influencing the policy and how that is creating like some problems for the conservation of biodiversity in general. For example, the current policy is heavily influenced by the modern science, and the current policy and biodiversity policy and institutions are heavily influenced by the Anglo-European dogma and understanding of nature, which totally eliminates the notion of coexistence of people and nature and fiercely promotes the protectionism and segregation of people and nature. If you see any kind of tiger reserve, or you see protected forests or like in protected areas, the notion is like the people are not a part of biodiversity. The people are not a part of the ecosystem. They should be removed. they do not contribute. Like human is not a part of the ecosystem, or humans are not a part of the ecosystem. Human society is not a part of the ecosystem. So the notion is that people and nature cannot coexist, which is a reductionist approach. Like it's heavily influenced like by the Anglo-Saxon, and it came to India only in the 18th century, like maybe in 1865, like from the advent of like forest department in India, which was never existing before that. But the forest department, like which was constituted like then, is not for scientific management, but rather exploitation of the human, the natural resources and forest resources in India under the name of scientific management. And it's such a fallacy. It's a fallacy. It's a kind of a fallacy model, like but we keep on building on that even today. But if you see on the other side, in the ancient scriptures, like it dates back like to 8,000, like in 1,000 BC, like there are these categorization of forests as Mahavan, Shrevan, and Tapavan. Mahavan is very, very common and very similar to the protected areas, where you are forbidden like from taking anything out of that. It is meant for wildlife. It is meant for nature. You are not supposed to be there. And Shrevan is like very synonymous like the plantations, like which is for the economic development like of the village. And Tapovan is for the religious and cultural practices. And also like there are places that are reserved for burial grounds like within the forest. But this particular thing is we physically we have driven like the British like out of India physically. But their institutions like that were made by the British were still intact, like more than 1,000 of them. And some of these institutions like have also criminalized most of the tribal populations in India. And it took 50 years like for us like to re-notify like those criminal tribes in India, which is like insane like that we did not. We only drove like the British out of the country physically, but we retained those institutions, and people still in India are fighting like with those institutions. It's just that like only we people like Indians replaced like those positions, and we are fighting among ourselves, which is like a very sad part. But however, like not everything is lost. Like but since 1988, like the Forest Policy or the Biodiversity Conservation Act and the Recognition of Tribal and Forest Dwellers Act in 2006, it creates like spaces, like legal spaces for the recognition of traditional knowledge and culture and people's relation with engagement, like dependence on forest, like is being considered like as quintessential, and environmental needs like are given priority, like and than just creating revenue like out of the forest. And also like coming to agriculture, like and how like this Anglo-European like dogma understanding or scientific or modern science like is influencing like our agriculture policies. Like I think if you have already participated like in yesterday's webinar like, by Mr. Ravindra Smelly, he spoke about like how the advent of green revolution has changed the entire architecture like of agriculture in India. For example, like in India, you have like 22 like agro-biodiversity hotspots. Like we have like more than 18,000 higher plants and 778 like major and minor crop species and 1,500 edible plant species, mostly evolved by the farmers in India. It's not by the agriculture universities or like some fancy scientists like sitting in fancy laboratories like has evolved all this. But this rich biodiversity like is a product of 9,000 years of agriculture like systems or indigenous and traditional farming systems in India. Not just like in these systems like that started from 1960, but all our agriculture pedagogy and university education or formal education takes reference from 1960s, very conveniently ignoring like the 9,000 years of legacy and heritage like that India has and the traditional knowledge that we have accumulated like in all these thousands of years. And this particular number like can give goosebumps to everybody. Like we have more than like 3 lakh to 4 lakh land races of paddy varieties, which were evolved like through traditional knowledge in India. But out of which like we already lost like more than half of like these varieties. I mean these land races, and thanks like to monocultures, like thanks to like this promotion of like hybrid, which are important like for food security. But in terms of biodiversity, it's a death knell. But we have to understand like we have to repurpose like our our food policies and food systems at this point. And apart from that, like we have more than like 300 odd animal breeds or livestock breeds in India. And most of these breeds, are more than 70%, 60% of these breeds are evolved like in the biodiversity communities of India, which is not recognized. However, the current agriculture and livestock policies are strongly entrenched again in Western dogma and Western like in modern sciences, and they mainly focus on yield. And the main patterns like of this school of thought are scientists and ICR institutes and universities. And there is either no or very little room for indigenous knowledge and cultural affiliations of food and food production systems in the dominant food and agricultural laws and policies like in of India at this point. And traditional pastoralism is not even recognized at the policy level in India. Apart from that, traditional knowledge in crops and livestock breeds are usually branded as inferior or unproductive in nature. And the consequence of that is that because of this modernization and commodification and industrialization of agriculture, over 75% of like crop varieties like around the world have disappeared. More than 30% of livestock breeds have vanished across the world, which is like confirmed like by FAO in 2004. So our inclination, like a strong affiliation, like towards the modern science and completely eliminating any other sciences as superstitions or unproductive, unreasonable, unrealistic, makes us like so entrenched like in one belief system, and we completely close our minds and eyes like for other possibilities and alternatives. So this particular thing like it gives a very interesting. Do not become so attached to any one belief that you cannot see past it to any other possibility. That's exactly what we are trapped in like with this modern science. We do not see any other possibility apart from what the conventional modern science like teaches us and tells us. But anyway, like there are paradigm shifts, like, and as you can see in the CBD Convention on biological diversity, it provides like some spaces like for recognition of indigenous knowledge and cultures and traditional knowledge and lifestyles through this Nagoya Protocol. And there are like negotiations at the international level with the World Intellectual Property Organizations to recognize like this traditional knowledge and folklore. In some countries, like there are sui generis legislations like which are specifically addressed for that, for protection of that traditional knowledge. And in other cases, like the communities can also get into agreements like with the patents or like with industries like to gain benefits or like equal benefits like for the knowledge or the products that produced like they're sharing with them. And as I mentioned earlier, like the Biodiversity Conservation Act and Forest Rights Act like was also created legal spaces like for safeguarding traditional knowledge and intellectual property rights of indigenous communities in India. Apart from that, like the plants. The protection of plant varieties and farmers' rights act in 2001 and the emerging guidelines of recognition of traditional pastoralist rights have also provided like in those legal spaces for recognition of traditional knowledge and traditional varieties. And even like in some kind of like technology advancements are happening. The artificial intelligence based technologies like blockchain is now making inroads into agriculture and biodiversity conservation, which could be the future, like conservation, how technology can aid like biodiversity conservation. With that, I'm almost coming to an end. Like this is almost my last slide. So as I said, like we have seen like the philosophy and the practice and viewpoints. We have seen like how our philosophy is influencing the policy or institutions, and how like they're creating problems, and how there are possibilities like that are emerging, and how these possibilities like could also lead to and influence and gives us the need for scientific pluralism. A pluralism here, like, and I would say it's not just cultural, like, science, modern science and traditional knowledge as, if considered as like two different cultures, the marriage like between these two is necessary to understand like, the better management of the natural resources. And just like one doesn't necessarily means the other one is inferior, or whether one is inferior doesn't mean the other one is better. but a kind of marriage like between modern science and traditional knowledge, or scientific pluralism is the need of the hour, which is necessary at this point. So Dr. R.A. Mashlikar, like, and then Director General of CSR, he suggested this concept called golden triangle. Of course, golden triangle is like used in a lot of different ways, but in medicine and healthcare, like in our medicine research, like he proposed like this particular, suggested this concept called golden triangle, and the golden triangle like brings together like the traditional medicine, modern science, and modern medicine together to augment, like take things forward. For example, maybe there might be some medicine for COVID, maybe waiting to be discovered in the traditional knowledge or like traditional medicine. But unless like these three things like come together to fight that, maybe we can overcome that. There is a possibility that. So such the creation of like such golden triangles is a need of the hour in the fields of agriculture, veterinary sciences, or fisheries, forestry, biodiversity, or even development and like food and nutrition, to name a few. So with that, I would conclude sharing my viewpoints, and let's celebrate like diversity and inclusion and equity and diversity, whether it be biodiversity, cultural diversity, or any other like diversity in this world. Diversity is a strength, and we have to make sure like we build upon that. With that, I would conclude my presentation, and thank you so much for everyone, like, and for your patience, and thank you for Telangana Biodiversity Board, like, for giving this opportunity. And this is the next thing, like, would not be just a kind of question and answer session, but I would be very happy, like, if it be a discussion where you would share your own viewpoints of how you see science and traditional knowledge, than just like asking a few questions. Thank you very much.
Yes, thank you so much, Kanna sir, for your talk. And I've always been back of traditional knowledge, and I just feel like everybody should think about all the scientific things, all the spirituals, religions behind us in a scientific way, and there is a traditional knowledge behind that. Okay, thank you so much. Thank you.
Thank you.
Shri Kannan, Dr. Kannan, for giving us such a wonderful lecture about science and tradition, linkage between the both. And thank you for all the participants from all the field, from NGOs, from expert committee members, from our scientist community, from students, teachers from all over Telangana, from our BMCs, Biodiversity Management Committee members from all over Telangana. Thank you for patient hearing. And thank you to Ritesh, Sagar Solutions, for having this wonderful online meeting. Thank you so much.